For decades, the UK has basically been running in two massive parallel races. The first, a sprint to get every single citizen online, and the second, a marathon to try and lead the world on climate change. But here's the thing. What happens when those two finish lines are in completely different zip codes? What if, in our big rush to build this amazing digital future, we just forgot to connect it to our green one? That's the critical question we're digging into today.
Just think about this for a second. We talk all the time about digital poverty, right? Not having internet access. And we talk about environmental poverty, living with pollution or other hazards. But what if, for the most vulnerable people, it's not an either-or situation? What if they're getting hit with both at the exact same time, creating this brand new, really powerful kind of disadvantage?
Well, it actually has a name: digital environmental poverty. And look, this is so much more than just not having a laptop. It's this tangled up mess where a lack of digital skills, not having access to the right tech, and the environmental mess from our digital world all crash together and honestly just make everything worse.
To really get our heads around this, we need to look at those two races I mentioned. So first up, the UK's decades-long mission to close the digital divide.
What's so fascinating here is how the definition of the problem just kept changing. I mean, at first, it was super simple. You either had internet or you didn't. The haves and the have-nots. The goal was just to get everyone a connection. But then we all realized, wait a minute, that's not enough. People needed the skills to actually use the internet. And then finally, the question got even bigger. Is being online actually making people's lives tangibly better?
And you can literally see this evolution laid out in the policies over the years. It kicked off with New Labour getting schools and libraries hooked up. Then the whole focus shifted to partnering with big companies to teach digital skills. By 2018, it was a legal right to have a basic internet connection, even if, let's be honest, basic was already pretty slow by then. And most recently, the leveling up agenda is all about the physical pipes of the internet, especially out in rural areas. But notice what's missing: a single, solitary mention of the environmental cost of all this new technology.
Okay, so that's the digital journey. Now let's switch tracks completely and look at that second race, Britain's massive ambition to be a world leader on climate change.
And you gotta give them this. The ambition was huge, enormous. The UK didn't just want to be in the game, it wanted to write the rule book. It made history, becoming the very first major economy to actually write a net zero emissions target into law. I mean, that's a world-leading move, no question.
But this is where the story gets complicated. This slide really shows the massive gap between the ambition and the reality. On the left, you've got all the grand promises, the Climate Change Act, the net zero target. But over on the right, you've got the independent watchdogs just sounding the alarm again and again. The Climate Change Committee keeps warning that the UK is way off track. The High Court even ruled the government's strategy was unlawful because it was all talk and no concrete plan. You see the pattern, right? Big promises, followed by warnings that the delivery just isn't there.
So we have these two massive, completely separate policy journeys. One digital, one green. And this right here is the crucial point. What happens in the real world, where these two paths don't just run parallel, they collide hard?
Let me just show you a number: 23.9 kilograms. Just think about that number for a second. What could that be?
That is the amount of electronic waste, e-waste, that every single person in the UK produces every single year. This one number just perfectly captures the total disconnect. It makes the UK the second largest producer of e-waste on the entire planet. We totally succeeded in getting people online, but we completely forgot to plan for the gigantic mountain of digital garbage it would create. And the scale of this blind spot is just staggering. Get this, in 2019, only 17% of that e-waste was properly recycled. And the amount of waste from our IT and phones, it nearly doubled in just over a decade. All because there's been no clear, joined-up plan for what we as regular households are supposed to do with all our old tech. And this collision isn't a one-way street either. It's not just our digital lives harming the planet. Now, climate change is coming for our digital infrastructure. As the Climate Change Committee warned just last year, extreme weather is a direct threat to our networks. And who's most at risk of being cut off? The most vulnerable people, the very ones who depend on that connection the most. It's a vicious cycle. So this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We can see the problems pretty clearly, right? These separate paths are causing real issues. So why on earth don't they connect? And what needs to change? This table just nails the disconnect perfectly. See, the government isn't totally blind to the overlaps, but its focus is almost entirely on itself. It moves its own services online, but ignores the environmental cost of all of us using more tech. It makes sure its own computers are green, but offers no clear plan for the e-waste piling up in our homes. It talks a big game about resilient networks, but has very little data on how vulnerable our privately owned infrastructure actually is. In every single case, the government is looking inward, not outward, to the rest of society.
And in the end, it all just boils down to this. The problem is structural. It's baked into the system. Digital poverty is a job for one government department over here. Environmental poverty is a job for another one way over there. They're treated as completely separate issues, to be solved in completely separate rooms by completely separate people.
Which leaves us with one final pretty critical question. In our own lives, right? The line between our digital world and our physical world has completely vanished. They're the same thing now. So as we move forward, can our policies really afford to keep pretending that they're still separate?